With us today, and very good, Leonie. Thank you. It's welcome everyone. It's wonderful that you're here with us today, and we're going to spend the next hour and also 15 minutes extra Q&A time with Judith together. My name is Helena. I'm managing director of 10 More In, and we're so happy to have you here. This masterclass is a twofold premiere for us because, first of all, it's the first one we do in English, so bear with me. And it's also the largest one we've ever hosted. So clearly, we're onto something with this topic. And thank you so much for joining. Yes, show me the reaction. That gives me a bit of confidence and motivation. Before I hand over to our host, oh my God, I've never seen so many hearts in my life. Thank you very much. Before I hand over to our host, let me share a few words about why we're here today and why 10 More In actually exists. So 10 More In, as you can see in these pictures, was actually founded based on the picture you see in the top left corner. It kind of illustrates that women are still missing at many of these tables where decisions are made. So based on that picture, Leah and Leah decided to make it the mission that we want to bring more women into leadership positions because we firmly believe that a world led equally by men and women is a better one. So let's fast forward to 2025. Not that much has changed with these recent pictures. And this isn't about complaining, but really just acknowledging reality, especially also here in Germany. So there's still work to do. If we go to the next slide, the current pace, if we continue at the current pace, it will take about 123 more years to reach true gender parity. We may not see that in our lifetime, but maybe our daughters will, and that's why we're also here today. And however, right now we have this really unique opportunity that we don't want to have this gap arise in AI. So we want to make sure together that this new era doesn't start without women at the table. So we want to have a zero there with the years it takes to close the gap. So how can we do that? Why do these gaps exist? So at 10 More In, we believe there's two reasons for this. The first reason is that we have systemic reasons, right? So lack of childcare, rigid societal structures, lack of access. And the second reason why these gaps exist is also that we as women sometimes hesitate to step into leadership roles. So throughout our work that we've done with our coaching programs and within the academy, we've seen, and within our careers actually for the last years, we've seen that many women kind of face the same challenges. So it's often self-doubt or risk aversion or conflict avoidance, not being the best at negotiations or visibility or a lack of network. These are kind of reasons that we found in our personal lives, but also with studies. It's not the case for everyone, but things that really keep us from stepping up. The good news about this is that we can totally tackle these challenges. We can take ownership of our growth and development in these areas, and you can also really well coach these areas. So we've built a coaching program, a coaching academy with the best coaches out there, and also leading experts such as Judith in the field that matter most in order to progress. Through these programs, we've seen incredible women, many of us in the room today, commit to this mission. And we've built a close-knit network of more than 2,000 female leaders who support each other every single day. It's really, really incredible. And to everyone from our network, thank you for sharing this AI class because you posted these posts, and that's why everyone is here today. And it just shows the effect and the power and the ripple that you can have when you speak up about topics that are important. And to everyone new, we'd love for you to join our network and join our academy and commit to this mission. Right, now coming back to the field where female leadership will truly matter in the future, which is AI. And this is something we're going to dive deeper into now. So please join me, send some hello reactions maybe, in welcoming our wonderful guest, Judith Dada. She's general partner at Visionaries Club, leading European VC, and hello, that's many hellos, and an AI expert. So Judith has over 10 years of experience in tech. She's invested in top AI companies such as Mistral, the big French chat, Paloa, N8N, where you can build workflows, managing over 1 billion in AI-focused venture funds. She holds a master's in computational social science from Oxford, writes extensively about AI and society, and helps people apply AI in practice. Her Instagram is a personal favorite of mine. Give her a follow. You will find many stories with very authentic, honest views, and you're always going to be up to date. And the next hour, Judith will share a lot of valuable content with us. Plus, she's also, as I said, kindly agreed to stay 15 minutes longer for an open Q&A. So I would say maybe post your questions in the chat, but I will also give the opportunity to ask some live questions. Since we're almost 2,000 people, I'm going to try the best to get all of these questions answered. So without further ado, let's get started. And Judith, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helena. It's so exciting to be here today and to give this AI masterclass. Today is about the AI revolution and why women need to join the table. But first, a little bit on me. Helena already did a bit of my introduction. So I like to think that I went down the technology and an AI rabbit hole a very long time ago. I've been obsessed with AI for, I think, now almost a decade. I originally started working at Facebook, asking myself, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And then from there, jumped into venture capital, in the past leading a fund called La Familia. It may sound like the Sicilian Mafia, but it's a plain early stage venture capital fund, and now I'm a general partner at Visionaries Club. I have been thinking about AI for a long time, back when no one was really calling it, kind of foundation models, and everyone was still talking about machine learning or deep learning. And if you don't quite know what the difference between those things is, fear not. We're going to dive into this in a second, and have been writing extensively about, my thoughts about AI, my thoughts about AI in society, and obviously investing in lots of really, really exciting AI companies out there. Today, what I would like you to do is to grab a piece of paper and to grab a pen, because we're going to do a few exercises that are quite interactive. So if you have nothing to write, make sure you grab that now. And without further ado, let's dive into the agenda. I'm going to dive into where we are right now. Where are the women? First questions. A very brief history of AI and the state of AI, from agents, from tokens to agents. I'm also going to talk about where we are going and give a brief macro outlook about where things are headed. I'm also going to speak about individually getting started. So basically becoming AI native, the best AI tools and how you can stay up to date, as well as how you can transform your organization through AI adoption secrets and specific resources that I'm going to share afterwards. So there's lots and lots more material that we can go through at the end of the webinar or of the masterclass. So lots more to dive into and to continue your individual AI journeys. But let's start off with a quote. This is Andrew Ng. He's a very, very famous AI researcher in the US. And he basically speaks about, just as electricity transformed almost everything 100 years ago, today I actually have a hard time thinking of an industry that I don't think AI will transform in the next several years. And so, in the same way that electricity is kind of all around us, like if you were to try and imagine a world without electricity, it's kind of unimaginable today. The same way AI in a couple of years will be everywhere around us, and it's going to be impossible to imagine a world without AI. Let's take a moment to step back and just realize what an incredible time we live in. I always say, kind of everything sounds like magic until it's possible, and then it just becomes technology. Everything sounds like AI until it's possible, and then it's just normal. Some of you may know the story from the Bible, when we celebrate Pentecost, and, kind of Jesus was coming down in these fire tongues and was giving people the ability to speak any language. And so the disciples were running around and spreading the message of Jesus and God. This is what was written in the Bible thousands of years ago. And many people were looking at this, the ability for anyone to speak any language and spread a message, as the stuff of magic and the stuff of wonders. Only it's now 2025, and Apple has just announced that they're going to launch this very capability with their kind of new AirPod technology, and give anyone the ability to basically have real-time translation. So something that we literally thought of as magic for thousands of years is now reality. That is the world that we live in. Now, this is also the world that we live in. You see a lot of incredible men on this slide here. We have Dario Amodei, the founder of Anthropic. We have Alexander Wang, who leads the superintelligence efforts at Meta together with Mark Zuckerberg. We've got Jan LeCun, we've got Demis Hassabis, Jeffrey Hinton, Elon Musk. The list goes on and on and on. These are incredibly impressive men. They're some of the brightest minds that we have, and they're the leaders behind today's AI breakthroughs. And we should give them all the applause that they deserve. But at the same time, it breaks my heart that in what I will believe, or I believe will be the biggest transformational shift that I think humanity has ever undergone, we don't see more women really shaping, the rules of power, the rules in which the world is being reformed right now. But actually, if you look a little bit closer, there are tons of women that are already making a really big difference. Maybe some of you saw this statistic. It's from ChatGPT, and it shows the number of female users and the number of male users, or the percentage. And in the beginning, when ChatGPT launched, you saw that, the vast majority of users were men, but actually that statistic has now flipped very recently, and now more women are using ChatGPT than men. So when it comes to using AI and adopting that technology, actually women are already playing a really important role. And also when it comes to leaders, there's tons of women that are already making a really, really important difference. You can see in the middle here, for example, Mira Murati, who was the former Chief Technology Officer of OpenAI and is now leading her own really successful company in this space. You can see Sarah Guo, who's an investor in the US and who also has a podcast called No Priors. That's really worth listening to, and she's really worth following because she's got some of the most interesting thoughts about the technology. We've also got, kind of founders of their own companies. We've got researchers like Feifei Li, who was behind, the ImageNet Challenge, is currently also championing a lot of world model research. We're going to get into that later. Don't worry if you've never heard about a world model or don't know what that is. But what I basically want to say is there's tons and tons of women that are really championing exceptional work in this space. And so I've listed a lot of their LinkedIns and also some of the maybe younger or less well-known faces, especially in the European ecosystem. We've seen some researchers and some founders here in the resources that we're going to share with you afterwards, so you can give them a follow. Okay, so much for, the world is currently largely being shaped by men, but women and some really fantastic women are playing an important role. Let's get into the actual content. Let's start with a very brief history of AI. So there's basically three things I want you to take away. There's a really, more detailed kind of overall history of AI that's linked in the resources for anyone that's more curious. But really, there's three times I want you to remember. The first is, around 1940, we form what we today know as kind of the computer interface. Then around 2012, long time afterwards, where we first come up with the breakthroughs behind what we call neural networks. So models that consist of different layers, that consist of different weights, that give us a specific output. And then 2017, which is really the most important date, because that's the date that made ChatGPT and all of that possible, which is the transformer architecture and the attention paper. Attention is all you need. Some of you may have heard about that in the past. We're going to get into what's behind that in a second. But first, let's take a step back. Artificial intelligence. It's a big word. And what artificial intelligence basically just means is expert systems that are, kind of performing a task that otherwise humans who are equipped with human intelligence were doing. And the first, initial layer of artificial intelligence was really expert systems that, were basically codifying a task in computer code. So, only a move that we had codified in computer code could then be executed by the computer. So if you were to think of a chess game, for every single move, you had to kind of hard code that into the system. That's kind of the very first, kind of AI systems that we had. Then over time, we became smarter. So we moved away from the expert systems that I was just describing to what we call machine learning. And in machine learning, you no longer handcraft all the rules. You actually collect labeled examples. So you basically pick a model and then use an optimization function to reduce the error on the labels that you've previously given the model. And so you basically train the model and you basically code the model. You no longer code every single rule or every single thing that you want the model to do. And so you have kind of a generalization level. And then once trained, the model is able to make predictions on new data, based on kind of that initial training labeled data that you gave it. And Jeopardy is, for example, a good example. Jeopardy, the game. You couldn't, encode every possible move or clue, that is needed for that game, in code. And so you basically train a machine learning model that is able to do that on your behalf. Okay, that's kind of the second layer. Now let's move one layer further. Deep learning, I'm sure you've all heard that term, is basically a sub-function of machine learning. And what deep learning does is it's basically deep neural networks with many layers that shines on unstructured data, such as images, audio, text, or video. And so deep neural networks are essentially a step-by-step system. You could think about it like a pattern spotter that learns by example. You've got a first layer that maybe spots some hints in the data, some edges in a photo or some words or some sentences. And then, the next layer combines those hints maybe to bigger ideas. So, that could be a wheel, or this could be, the name of a place. And then the last layer makes decisions on what this is. So this is what we call kind kind of a classifier. This is a positive review, or this is a cat. And so this training in deep learning can be supervised, self-supervised, or reinforcement learning. You may have heard those words before. Supervised learning essentially means, what we just heard from machine learning, you basically start with labeled examples. But unlike machine learning, you no longer have to use tabular data, so data in tables. You can actually now also use image data, for example. So the image of a cat that has the label cat. And so you train the model on these kind of image or on these label pairs. And then you've got self-supervised learning, which is one step further from that, where the supervision is no longer coming from the humans. Before, the humans were giving the model, kind of those label pairs, and now the model is coming up with the self-supervision, where essentially it learns patterns from raw unlabeled data, and you basically give it many examples, and you basically leave off a piece, and then as you give the model lots of examples, the model can actually infer that, oh, I think, there's an ear for this cat image over here, so likely the piece that's missing is the other ear. That's self-supervised learning. No longer supervision is coming from the humans, but from the machine. And then the last piece that's brought us a lot of the current advancements in AI is reinforcement learning. And this is a very intuitive form of learning that many of you will know, because it's the learning that we use with our pets, right? It's like, you want the dog to do a certain thing, so you give the dog a treat to reinforce a behavior that the dog then learns from that. We see it a lot in gaming, for example, where we're basically, giving the system an environment to act in, and then a way to measure the reward. And a game playing agent can then, learn which moves can actually allow it to win that game over time. So now we've heard about artificial intelligence, kind of the outer ring that describes everything, expert systems. Then, one subset of that, machine learning, one level more powerful. One subset of that, deep learning, even more powerful. And let's now get to, what currently is everyone's so excited about, foundation models. So foundation models are essentially generalizations of deep learning models. And we just spoke about, traditional machine learning models before. Those are basically, task-specific models. So you're training a machine learning model for text generation, or you're training a machine learning model for summarization, or for a chatbot or Q&A. The difference with foundation models is that we use it for many different purposes at the same time. And the model can just adapt on the fly. Like, we just take this for granted now, because we can ask cheap ChatGPT about issues in our marriage, about, kind of music that we like, and we want, to find out more about the artist, or about, I don't know, like a math problem that we want to solve. And it can just figure out all of that. But that's actually the huge, kind of unprecedented breakthrough that we've seen over the years. Let's see if I can get this video to play. I hope that you can see it. So the interesting thing that you just saw is that, as we basically scale these models, new behaviors start to emerge, new capabilities start to emerge. So in the beginning, just language understanding, and suddenly these models can do translation, they can do pattern recognition and common sense reasoning. So these are all things that are basically appearing as we scale the model. Why are we able to scale these models so effectively? As I just said, language models are essentially next word predictors. They predict whatever the next most likely word is. And the big breakthrough behind LLMs, or language models, was the transformer architecture. That's the 2017 date that I just referenced in the beginning. Because up to that point, when you think about the neural networks or the deep learning networks that we saw, those were sequence models. So basically they were processing information in sequences, which bottlenecks the training and makes these models struggle with long-range links in the data that they're looking at. And then we basically figured out that if we use GPUs, so graphical processing units, or also TPUs, tensor processing units, which are chips that originally were focused on game design, we can actually parallelize a lot of this pattern matching, which allows us to scale the amount of data that we can process and the way that we train models very, very significantly. And so what emerged is what we call the scaling laws. You've probably heard about that, because the scaling laws essentially mean that, we kind of found out that as we scale the compute, so the chip power that can, make a model do processing, and we scale the data, as we basically scale these large language models on the entirety of the data that is available on the internet, we can actually scale the parameters, so we can actually scale the models. And so this is, it almost, these curves almost followed this law and this curve that you see there. And that's really the reason behind why everyone's so excited in AI right now, and why you see these huge amounts of money that are being spent in the field. Is because through the transformer architecture and through this attention mechanism that basically allows us to parallelize a lot of this processing, if we scale the compute, if we scale the data, we basically give these models all of the data available on the internet and then some, we're basically able to continuously scale the performance of what we get out of the models. So that took us from starting with a computer and simple hard-coded expert rules to machine learning, to deep learning, and kind of the sequential processing as a subset of machine learning, to what are LLMs today and the current breakthrough that makes us so excited about the current performance that we're seeing. Let's now go a little bit deeper. That's the history. Let's now go from tokens to agents. I'm sure you've all heard about tokens, because large language models do not think in words, they think in tokens. What you can see here is I wrote, Judith is in the midst of the AI Masterclass with 10 more in, and I used this tokenizer, which basically breaks this down into tokens, because LLMs do not read information the way that we read it, they read tokens. And so a token is essentially a small chunk of text. So it might be a short word like cat, or it might be a piece of a longer word like inter plus national, or it could be a space, it could be a punctuation, it could be an emoji. And so each token is assigned a number. You can see the numbers down there. And these numbers are then represented in vector space, which is basically the space the LLM uses to detect patterns and predict the next token. And so essentially, when you give an LLM a prompt, it will translate that prompt into the tokens. It will then map the tokens in vector space, and then it will get you an output again in tokens, and will translate that output back into human readable text. That's essentially all the magic that goes on behind how an LLM processes information. So LLM need tokens to think. Now, there's different types of thinking. I'm sure many of you have read this wonderful book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. There's system one thinking, which is fast, unconscious, automatic, everyday decisions, error prone. It's what we kind of use when we think on the fly. And then there's system two, which is slower thinking, conscious thinking, effortful. We use it for complex decisions. It's when we sit down, we write something down, we break something into smaller chunks. Well, it turns out LLMs are thinking roughly in the same way. We basically have system one thinking, which is what we call the context window. So the context window is essentially, what the LLM is able to process on the fly. And then there's system two thinking, which is reasoning. We call this chain of thought in the world of LLMs. And then we have tools and databases. So these are things that the LLM can tap into in order to kind of help it, get to a result. And we're going to go through a couple of examples of what this looks like. The big breakthrough that we're currently seeing is that we're basically realizing that the complexity of a task that an AI model can solve is increasing rapidly through the length of time that the model can reason. So we basically now have models that don't just give us an output on the fly, that don't just use that system one thinking, but that can use tokens. So, remember the tokens that we spoke about in the beginning, that can use tokens to think, that can use tokens to basically break down, a bigger problem into separate parts. We used reinforcement learning to basically do a lot of this, which we spoke about in the beginning. And so it can basically break something down into, smaller chunks, and then, reason over them for a longer period of time. And what you can see here is this analysis from Meta that basically looks at the length of a task that AI can do is doubling every 7 months. So we basically see AI being able to reason and being able to basically think for longer and longer. And this is really the reason behind a lot of the agentic breakthroughs that we see right now, because these agents can basically use tokens to think and can therefore solve ever more complex tasks. I'm sure some of you have heard about these benchmarks, right? Where we talk about the human baselines, whatever it is a human can do, and then we benchmark what models are already capable of. And the interesting thing is that actually in a lot of tasks, AI is already better than the human benchmark. So we have tasks like image classification, medium level reading comprehension, PhD level science questions, and so on and so forth, where already AI is stronger than the human baseline. Some of you may have also heard that AI is actually now competing in some of the most difficult global competition competitions. So we saw the IMO Gold Medal, we saw the ICPC programming competition. These are competitions where extremely capable humans are, kind of competing for extremely difficult tasks. And it turns out that if we enter a reasoning model, it can, solve the tasks like a human does. It basically, takes a few hours to reason and then comes out with results that beat even the best human performance in those jobs. And so you've seen, maybe, this tweet that Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, did about this Death Star picture, right? So the Death Star, OpenAI is kind of taking over the world and it's kind of coming for everything. That is the theoretical pitch. And that's a lot of the reason, kind of these models being able to, just kind of, become smarter and smarter and do things more autonomously for a long period of time. That's a lot of the reason, behind the excitement in the AI community today. You just saw the benchmarks of what AI is already capable of doing, but then the question is, like, why does the reality oftentimes still feel like this? Why does it feel like, yeah, okay, there's the theoretical pitch of what AI can do, then there's the reality of, like, not all of our lives are being run by AI today. Not all of our lives are completely autonomous AI agents that are ordering our food and booking all of our appointments, and everything is just run by AI agents. So why is that? Let's dive in a little bit deeper. So I just said, LLMs have some incredible capabilities. They basically have encyclopedic knowledge. So, we basically ask them something, and unlike humans, they can just recite it all and give you kind of, a perfect summary. Much more capable than humans. But the issue is, LLMs also hallucinate. I'm sure you've heard about this. And because we said earlier, if you remember, that LLMs are essentially really, really effective next token predictors. They're stochastic models. They predict whatever they think is most likely as a next token. They've been trained on the entirety information of the internet. And so they're essentially like a really good internet document generator, right? They just, predict whatever they think the most likely next document or the most likely next word based on every single Reddit thread and every single post on the internet is. But that also means that sometimes they get things pretty wrong. And training and prompting can actually also bias them towards answering, even when the evidence they have is weak. Because the LLMs have essentially learned, oh, it's better, the reward is better if I pretend like I know the answer. So I'm just gonna, pretend to give you, kind of what I think is right. I'm just gonna guess based on, kind of all of the data on the internet, but it's actually going to be way off. So what we need to do to overcome hallucinations is we basically need to allow LLMs to admit when they don't know something, to admit I don't know, or to take more time to reason. Let's look at that in a second. So I said earlier that models can use this kind of chain of thought reasoning approach based on reinforcement learning to understand what's happening and decide on the best actions. So they use these additional computational resources during the inference phase when they're essentially, kind of spitting out the result to improve the outcome. Now let's look at an example at the right here. You see, kind of a simple, kind of mathematical problem. Emily buys 23 apples and 170 oranges. What is the cost of each apple? Answer the question in a single token. So the LM just takes a wild guess and it says $3. And that's the wrong answer. But now we allow the LLM to use tokens, to basically burn tokens and to break the problem down and think. And we basically say, let's break this down step by step. It defines the variables, it sets up the equation, and so on and so forth. And it basically gets to the result 7, which is the right answer. So depending on whether or not the model is able to think, it will be able to get this right. Now, the next limitation to LLMs is that they suffer from jagged intelligence. What's jagged intelligence? We said earlier that LLMs do not think in words, they think in tokens, which are these subwords. And so many tokenizers will actually use something and kind of tokenize it in one token. So for example, when we ask it how many R's in strawberry, you've probably all heard this example, the LLM can't actually count the R's in strawberry because it thinks in tokens. And so it will give you the wrong answer. However, if we give the LLM the ability to use tools, because LLMs can use tools, so they can tap into external tools. What are tools? Web search is a tool, or code is a tool. Code is basically acting like a calculator. The LLM is actually able to come up with the right word because it no longer has to guess. It just needs to call a tool, and the tool can help it figure out the answer. So if we tell it, how many R's in strawberry, verify that with code, it's actually able to give us the right result. You've maybe also seen this example, which is this map of Germany, where we ask the LLM, generate a map of all of the states in Germany, and it just comes up with something that is like quite correct. Like, it's not totally off, but it says Bayern instead of Bayern, and there's also two Bayerns, and then it says that Saarland actually also exists twice, and so it just makes a couple of mistakes. Then if we give the LLM additional access to tools and say, use an API of geographic data, it actually gets the result perfectly because it can use that additional intelligence. You may have also heard that LLMs are they kind of suffer from amnesia. We call this like anterograde amnesia. So, and it's a metaphor that describes that LLMs basically don't have long-term memory after training. They basically just have this, kind of one shot to get something right, and they're not able to, incorporate the things, that they're learning through reasoning in, kind of their memory, the way that we learn, right? When we sleep at night, we're able to consolidate the things that we've learned into our memory, and we consolidate the knowledge, and we basically learn. Even my 2-year-old daughter, when she touched a hot stove like yesterday and she cried because it was really painful, she's not going to touch it the next day because she remembers that she hurt herself yesterday. This is not how LLMs work. LLMs today do not have memory, and so that makes them, I think, good comparisons, like a really, really capable student that you're trying to teach the piano, and they're coming in for a lesson. You're kind of giving them an hour-long lesson, and in the beginning they know nothing, but in the end they kind of get the first chords right. And then that student comes back the next day, but they've completely forgotten everything that you taught them yesterday. And it's still that same really capable student, but they're not able to build up this gradual, capability. But we can actually give LLMs access to external memory. And so we can find cruxes to be able to, make up for the fact that today they can't actually, incorporate this information yet. So now, how does that bring us to agents? What are agents? You've all heard about this word. Agents are essentially self-guided systems that reason and take action. We heard about the reasoning part earlier, and we heard about taking action because of LLMs being able to tap into tools, right? So they can do a web search, they can use APIs, they can, use code. And now the self-guided piece comes in, because so far, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about workflows. The picture here on the right? Workflows are basically closed-end systems where we have predetermined steps that are written in code, and that we just sequence through. So there's an LLM call in the first step, and there's an LLM call in the second step, and it ends with the third step. Now, the difference is that agents are essentially open-ended. They have a trigger that starts them, and then they have autonomy to basically decide and reason and take action as they see fit. And so agents are really good when the path to the solution is unclear, and workflows are really good when the path to solution is known upfront. Let's now do the first example. I'd love you to take the piece of paper and do a little exercise, which is you all need to run a performance review, a workshop next Tuesday, and now take 45 seconds to list everything that is involved in this task. So write down all the things that you would need to do if you had to run this performance review workshop for whatever job or team you're in, next Tuesday. Write down all the things that you'd have to do. I'm going to give you all a few seconds to think about all the things that are involved in that, listing all the details that go into planning the performance review workshop. Okay, I'm sure you could write for many more minutes. We're doing this in a very, very, very fast motion. This is part of a workshop that's also linked in the resources. So if you want to do this with the time that it actually requires, you can find the same slides in the resources to run within your own teams. So basically, I think what I wanted to get you to understand in this small exercise is that AI automation is actually a lot more complex than people make it sound, right? So we talk about like, why haven't agents, taken over the world yet? Well, it turns out there's actually a lot of complex information that goes into, even something as small as, planning a performance review workshop. Because, there are general things that you need to plan for, like making time, but there's also, more specific things like coming up with the content and creating the agenda and like 50 other small things that you need to do that are actually really, really specific. So what sounds really easy is oftentimes hugely complex. Now, we just said LLMs are trained on the whole data of the internet. That's basically all they know. They have this encyclopedic knowledge. They're incredibly smart. But at the same time, there's actually also a lot of information that that's in your head that the LLM does not have. And so it's all about getting this overlap right if we want to build capable AI systems or agents. And so in the second step, let's go back to this exercise. I would like you to plan the workshop and now list all the knowledge and all the tools. So what is the knowledge and what are the tools, can also be software tools, you need in order to make it, kind of a usable workshop. And, if you had to provide the LLM, with a set of instructions about the knowledge and the tools it needs to plan this for you, like what are the things that you would need to give it access to? List all that down on your piece of paper in the next 30 seconds. Going deep into your performance review brain, figuring out all the different things that you need to do to plan a really great workshop and the knowledge and the tools you need to provide the LLM with to make it usable. There we go. Okay. I'm guessing that a lot of the things that you wrote down, a lot of the tools are things like, go into, email and, send out a calendar invite for all the participants who need to participate in this workshop, or go into, this document folder to, look at whatever information or look at these performance metric dashboard data that we've saved in the SharePoint file, go into Google Drive or go into the internet and do a search or go into Google Docs, whatever it is. And probably there's also some information that just sits in your head. So maybe you wrote something like, go talk to Lisa and figure out, what the results were from the workshop they ran last week. And so again, it's meant to show you that, there's a lot of things that we need to do and that we need to instruct the LLM with to actually get this overlap right in terms of setting it up, not just with all the information that's on the internet, but also all the information that we individually know, some of which is only ever in our brain. And so that's the second learning, is you really need to give the LLM the right context and the right point of time in order to get to good automations. This is why you hear a lot of people talk about context engineering. Context engineering is really kind of the talk of the town, or context is the word of, kind of AI in 2025 because of how complex but important context is. And so we already spoke about things like, long-term memory. Right, so that goes into context, is you need to remember what the last performance review workshop was about, and you need to consider those results in the next performance review workshop. But there's also, things like instructions, or what we call a system prompt. So instructions are like the general, kind of set of instructions that you give the AI agent or the LLM system in order to, determine or define the behavior that you would like the AI model to have during the conversation. There's also things like retrieved information or retrieval augmented information, RAG, this blue box in the middle that you've heard about, maybe this term. It basically means that you're able to pull in external up-to-date knowledge, relevant documentation from documents, from databases or APIs. And so all of these different boxes go into what we consider context that we actually need to nail in order to get automation to work well. To give you a little example of a great AI company called Langdoc, which is an AI solutions company for bigger companies that's doing really, really well. I actually copied their system prompt for you to see here. So what you basically see is the system prompt. So the general set of instructions that are given to the AI system, to this agent, to, in a self-determination, be able to reason and take actions, is that you engage warmly and honestly with the user. You're direct, you avoid ungrounded with sycophantic flattery, you maintain professionalism, you're grounded in honesty, and you best represent your company values. You're helpful, direct, and professional. You avoid empty flattery. You use markdown formatting with headings, and you prefer long form structured answers when the questions involve work, research, or multiple steps. So you basically provide, a lot of very, very fine-grained, detailed instructions to the LLM so that it really knows, how to act on your behalf. I think a third learning I'd like to take you away is that you shouldn't get lost in the art of prompt engineering. You may have all heard about prompt engineering, right? So what you just saw was part of a prompt. That's part of the general prompt that we give to the agent or to the system so that it knows how to behave. And there's many, many, kind of complex forums that you find online where people, speak about how to exactly write these prompts. If you want to get started with AI automation, you shouldn't get carried away with that just now. It's really not that important. However, if you want to, there's infinite complexity in terms of how prompts can best be written. So this is just another example where you see the prompt structure. You start with a task context, then you do the tone, like how should the tone be? Then you give it the background data, the documents. You give it detailed task descriptions, examples. You give it conversation history. You tell it exactly how to output or format the output, and you give it any pre-filled responses. There's also actually really helpful tools like these AI prompt optimizers that you can find in ChatGPT or in OpenAI's ChatGPT, and also in some other systems that you can use. And you could just give it a prompt and it will allow you to refine the system prompt. So you're basically prompting a system to create a better prompt. And these are very, very useful if you want to write better prompts in the beginning. And so if you go back to your exercise, if you basically write a system prompt now, so instead of general instructions based on the notes you just took that give you, all the things that are involved in the workshop, all the tools you need, all the knowledge you need, and you then find a trigger to trigger the workflow, and you also give it access to some memory, you're actually well underway to building your very first AI agent, because that's exactly how it's done. And if you use some tools like N8N to do that, then you're basically, ready to build your first AI agent by tonight. The important thing is that, this is really not a, kind of get it right at first try type of exercise. The AI native approach, as we always call it, is really you analyze the output that you get after the first try. You'll modify the prompt, you can modify it with AI. You add more context as you realize, actually, it also needs access to this information, or it actually doesn't quite need access to this information. You analyze the output again, and then you start, kind of the loop again. And so you go through this iteration, and that will give you the best results over time. So we covered the history, we covered going from tokens to agents. Let's now cover a little bit of where we're going. You've all heard about inference prices are falling drastically. So the prices for basically using models are coming down drastically. But thinking models, the reasoning that we just mentioned, actually also consumes a lot more tokens because they need tokens to think. And so what we're actually seeing is Jevons paradox. You may have heard about this. Jevons paradox is basically the fact that if we make a resource more efficient, then actually the consumption of that resource increases. And it actually, comes from a really interesting example from history where the amount of coal that you needed was drastically reduced through Watt's invention of the steam engine. And so you didn't need as much coal as you needed before. And so what people thought initially was, okay, wow, the coal consumption is actually going to go down because we don't need as much coal. But actually the very opposite happened. Because it was now more efficient, so more economical, we basically used it a lot more. And so the use of the resource actually increased. And so as the resource gets more efficient, the consumption doesn't actually go down, it goes up drastically. And we're currently seeing that same thing happen in AI. You've heard about this kind of, wild CapEx investment, so investment in data centers that we're using to train models and to inference models. That's absolutely unprecedented. I saw a really wild statistic where in the US, almost 40% of GDP growth is now driven by AI CapEx investment. So just think about it. Almost half of the growth of GDP in the US is now basically driven by AI. It's absolutely unprecedented. And it shows how much hope and how much, if you think back to the scaling law, how much expectations AI companies are currently putting in how these systems will, drive performance in the future. An interesting fact to consider is also that there's lots of models in competition, but the race is no longer clearly, won by OpenAI. There's actually lots and lots of, models, Gemini, Anthropic, but also Grok, also international models like Qwen from Alibaba that are doing really well. And one additional piece of information, unfortunately for all of us, is that Europe is not doing well in this AI race. So when I just showed you those numbers, of capital expenditure, CapEx investment going up, Europe is barely playing a role, unfortunately, in that game. We see examples like self-driving cars in the US, right? Waymo in San Francisco. If you haven't written in a self-driving car, I highly recommend go to San Francisco and sit in one and just try the technology. It's absolutely mind-blowing. You'll love it. And what we're actually seeing is that, Waymo cars, the self-driven autonomous cars, have 91% fewer accidents, so injuries or worse crashes than human drivers. So they're actually saving lives already every single day. And I'm not sure how long it's going to take for us to get access in Europe to this technology, because we're just not set up right now to be able to roll out autonomous driving at scale. I'm sure you've heard about the AirPods that I referenced earlier, real-time translation. Apple has announced, because of European data protection law, that this technology is not going to be accessible in the EU. So actually, when it comes to AI, we're more and more really seeing a gap and a chasm in between what is happening in the US and what's happening in Europe. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to get to some more actionable tools that we can go through in a second, but I just want to really, double down on this point. If you think about the stack of AI, you may have heard about this term. There's a couple of different layers that we have to consider. There's the energy layer. You may have heard about the fact that AI is incredibly energy intensive. It needs tons and tons of energy. Already today, AI inferencing is taking the consumption of energy of France, right? So all of France's energy consumption is basically what AI consumes today, and it's on track to be the consumption of India, right? Which is like, more than 1 billion people very, very soon over the course of the next couple of years. And so it needs a lot of energy, but energy is actually not something that we have, huge availability in Europe. And actually energy is also very expensive in Europe. It's twice as expensive as it is in China or the US. Then we need chips, right? We need the kind of the capital expenditure, the data centers that I just spoke about, that are going to kind of have racks of these chips that are, doing the computation. And there's a ton of things that go into that: raw material, semiconductor, equipment and manufacturing. And we have one beautiful company called ASML that's playing a really important role in this. And they basically are behind, the silicon that's helping a lot of these computer chips, become smaller and faster. But other than ASML, we really don't play a role in the supply chain of AI hardware at all. And then there's the two layers on top. There's the foundation models. You've all heard about these, right? OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini from Google. And there's the AI applications and services. And we have companies like Mistral, and they're fantastic companies. But if you just look at the magnitude, we're not really playing a role at the foundation model layer in the world. And then we have some, really fantastic AI application companies like 11 Labs, or Paloa, and there's many, many more. And so here, really, Europe can play a bigger role, but we're still overall struggling in the international competition. I'm going to skip over this because of time, unfortunately. But what I want to leave you with is a little bit of an outlook of where things are going. So there's two perspectives. One perspective is that really, this current paradigm, this current scaling that I just mentioned, is what's going to bring us to AGI. You've heard about AGI, artificial general intelligence, basically an AI system that is as smart as most humans on Earth. And that is one view. But there's another view, which is that we'll need several paradigms, right? Like LLMs are maybe just a first paradigm, and there's going to be one or two or maybe three additional paradigms that we need until AI actually gets to this, throughout the benchmarks, PhD level intelligence. And if you take that perspective, then actually world models are one of the paradigms that people are currently very, very excited about. They're basically a next frontier. They're a model that can imagine how the world evolves in response to an agent's behavior. So in the same way that us as humans, we have a mental representation of the world around us. I kind of know that if I take this pen I drop it, it falls to the ground and makes a noise. That's essentially what world models do, but for AI. So that an AI agent can basically, move around and train in the simulated world. It's really, really important for robotics, for computer graphics, for autonomous driving, and for physics simulation. And in world models, we're actually making incredible progress. This is an example of Google Genie 3 that was released a couple of months ago in August. And this is a world that is entirely simulated. So this is not a video, that someone created. This is an entirely generated world. And you're basically able to move around in this world. And, everything is essentially generated by AI. This is absolutely unprecedented because what it allows us, I have another video here, is think about the fact that you could train a robot or a car within the world imagined by the world model. You don't need real data anymore. I'm sure you've all seen these Waymo cars and they're driving around and they're collecting all this data, right? They're essentially scanning and scanning with all their sensors the world all the time. And that basically limits, the performance that we can get out of these autonomous systems, robots, because we actually need to give them real data. Or if we can actually give them simulated data from these, simulated worlds, we can get significantly more performance out of them, without needing that real data. And so that could lead to this vast unlock in robotics, in autonomous driving. And these are really areas where Europe is strong. Think about our OEMs in the car space. Think about our robotics companies. And so what I basically want to instill you with is a lot of hope that actually, it's not necessarily, AGI tomorrow, because if that's the case, if, really OpenAI is going to reach AGI next year, then I do think it's going to be too late for Europe to play a role there. But if we believe more in that second paradigm, where there's actually going to be a couple of shifts and a couple of breakthroughs still that we need, and there's lots and lots of opportunities still for European companies, European talent, and a lot of the industrial base that we have here to play a really important role, I think that should make us all helpful. Now let's get to you. How can you individually get started? I'm going to go through a couple of tools, and maybe you know all of them already, but bear with me because I think they're really worth trying if you haven't given them a try yet. You may think about, kind of image and video as a first start. If you think about image and video, there's a couple of tools I really want to recommend, and I really want to focus on Replicate. Replicate is essentially an AI marketplace, right? So you often hear about AI APIs. And you may wonder, well, if I'm not a developer, then it's really difficult to, kind of get access to these APIs. So how do I actually run these models? Well, you can just get an account on Replicate. And I'm not invested into this company, so I just really love them. I use them every day. And you essentially hook them up once with your credit card, and you can get access to any model that you can run through an API. So if you want to run Sora 2, the model that OpenAI just launched, if you want to run Nano Banana by Gemini, if you want to run, the Flux model family from Black Forest Labs, which is actually a fantastic foundation model company from Freiburg, Germany, that is really, making headwinds around the world, making headlines around the world for the fantastic work that they're championing. You can use all of them through Replicate. So it's really worth it. Get an account there, give it kind of, $20, $30, and just play around with the models. You don't need to do any coding. It's all very, very intuitive, and you can use all the models and play around with them. There's fantastic web apps like Glyph, where you can build custom AI power-weighted image and video generators. There's Synthesia if you want to do some AI avatars and you want to train your own avatar and have it do work for you. You can check them out. They're really fantastic. There's Captions, which is a really great mobile app that I'm using for my social content, where you can upload a video of yourself and it generates all the auto captions and recognizes what you're saying and will then edit specific image sections into the video. So you basically create a full, kind of professional video without having to edit it even once, all through the power of AI. I wanted to give you an example of Nano Banana because this really, really, really shocked me. So you can see an image of myself on the left here, which a really fantastic friend of mine, photographer Anadaki, took. She's absolutely incredible. And I gave it to Nano Banana and just asked it to create more variants. And so all the other pictures that you see on the right are not actually, taken by a photographer, but they were generated by Nano Banana. If you hadn't told me that these were generated and I had amnesia like LLMs do and hadn't remembered what I actually did in the photo shoot, I would not have been able to tell you that, for example, this image here on the bottom right was actually generated by AI. Let's look at a couple of LLM tools. I mean, you all know these tools. You all have heard about OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, XAI, Mistral, DeepSeek. These are kind of the leading LLM models. let's speak very, very briefly about how we measure how these LLM models are doing good or bad work. So that you have heard, I think, about benchmarks. Benchmarks are basically the way that we test the performance of these models. Now, there's tons of different benchmarks. I just wanted to give you one benchmark that is called Humanity's Last Exam. And it's basically a really hard benchmark. So basically, a benchmark is a set of questions that the LLM needs to reason over, needs to, a task the LLM needs to fulfill. And we basically measure the performance in order to determine if it's already crossed, kind of the human baseline. And if we're at, kind of the ideas with Humanity's Last Exam, if we're at 100%, then we've reached AGI. And you can see how the models are, kind of tracking over time, the last one being, kind of June 25. These are really hard questions. Like, if you look at some of these benchmarks, it's actually incredible. Like, to give you one example, in ornithology, state how many pair tendons a specific hummingbird's sesamoid bone supports. I don't have any idea what the answer is, but LLMs are already able to answer currently, or like reasoning models, around 30% of these really, really, really hard questions, kind of humanity's last exam if we ever had to do one. And so one really great way to make this more actionable for you in your day-to-day work is actually a tool called LM Arena. So LM Arena actually allows you to test models side by side, because we can't all, I mean, you can either look at the benchmarks and based on the benchmarks decide which model we want to use best, but these questions that I just showed you are not really the questions that maybe come up in our day-to-day work when we're working with these models. And so what's actually a bit more usable, if you're not sure, should I use Gemini? Should I use Anthropic Claude? Should I use OpenAI? Is just go to LM Arena. I think most of this is actually completely free, and you can, either battle with two anonymous models, or you can just choose two models of your preference, for example, Gemini and Claude, and give it a prompt and see the results side by side. And so that really allows you to kind of get a feel for which model, works best for the needs and for the preferences that you have. Okay, we're short on time, so I'm going to go through these briefly. When it comes to audio, there's really three tools, or two. One is a podcasting tool. So for those of you who do podcasts, I really recommend Riverside, because they've got some amazing kind of AI editing functionality. But really, 11 Labs and Suno. 11 Labs is a European company, from Warsaw, like an absolutely incredible team. It allows you to create AI voices. So you could either upload a sample of your voice and just make it scale to any text that you give it, and you can listen to Judith, in eternal loops through generated AI Judith voices, or you can create your own voices. You can add emotion, you can add tone, you can add pause, you can add exclamation and have it talk really loud. Like, you can do all these things just with a couple of clicks. It's so much fun. I play around with it sometimes on the weekends. I'm just so mind blown that this stuff is possible today. So highly recommend that you check it out. And then there's also Suno, which is a great company based in New York in the US, and you can create AI music. And another tool that I really recommend you play around with, because some of the AI music you can create, you can't differentiate in between AI or human generated content anymore. Okay, let's rush through. There's a bunch of additional tools. I'm not going to spend too much time. I recommend you just basically check them out. These are all tools that you can mostly test for free. So, go and play around with them. And I'm sure you're going to have tons of fun with them. I want to leave you with a couple of resources on how you can stay up to date. So I actually put together a list of AI reads, so amazing people who have written about AI, and I've actually tagged them as beginner and advanced content. So depending on where you stand on that spectrum, you can just start with the beginner content, and you can go through the list. I think it's now got 80 different reads, some really long blog posts, some amazing podcasts, some articles, and just, pick the ones. You can also choose by topic. So are you interested in enterprise transformation? Are you interested in this topic around AGI? Are you interested in ethics? Are you interested in geopolitics and products? And just, figure out which reads are best. And I've read them all. I think they're all fantastic. So I'm sure you're going to have lots of fun with it. I also think you should all, if you're not doing it, get an account and hang out on X. I'm not doing this to support Elon Musk. Fuck him. But I really think that, on X, when it comes to AI content, the information sources are pretty incredible. If you don't know where to start, just go to my X account, look at the people I'm following, and just follow the same people, because I mostly just follow AI people and some news outlets. But basically, if you train X a little bit on the content that you like versus don't like, it's really going to show you absolutely amazing AI content, and especially from researchers, leading AI research. They're all on X, from leading enterprise leaders in the US that are adopting this technology every day, that are sharing wonderful, wonderful, wonderful insights. Go on X, do that work. It's really worth it. I'm going to end for the last couple of minutes with a couple of AI adoption secrets from, transforming an organization. You've all heard about the MIT study. The MIT study basically says that, yeah, everyone is, using AI and trying AI, but like it's not working yet. Like none of the stuff works. 95% of projects fail. And so what is absolutely true is that AI is adopted or is being tested like, nothing ever before. You see the stats here, like it's absolutely incredible the amount of pilots that are being run. As we just saw earlier, AI also still has lots and lots of barriers and lots of things that don't work. So it's actually no surprise that a lot of the things that are being tried are not leading to tangible results. However, I would say that if in 2025, and it's now October, you're an organization that is significantly spending money on AI and you're not seeing a single piece of value out of it, you're honestly doing something wrong, because the technology already works incredibly well. And we see the early innings of companies that are starting to adopt AI, full on, and are really becoming AI native, starting to pull away from the other companies that are laggards and are being left behind and not being able to use the technology to transform the business. And so really, if you're not getting any value whatsoever out of AI and you think it's a waste of time, I think you're doing something wrong. So what are the things that we're seeing, companies do that is, kind of right? Well, there's two things that we're noticing. First, you can learn a lot from startups. Startups are actually, maybe because their workforces are younger, because they're more agile, because they're used to uncertainty and chaos, they're able to adopt this technology a lot faster and more natively than corporates. Not a big surprise. But on average, we say anything that's weekly active usage in a startup is monthly active usage in a corporate, right? And so all the corporates can do right now is go find a bunch of startups and learn how they're using AI. That's going to be a really, really good tip. There's three additional things that I'd like to end with, three additional AI adoption philosophies. The first one is, if you are a leader, you're leading a team, you're leading an organization, you may be even the CEO, and you're not adopting AI. And by adopting AI, I mean getting an account, going on Replicate, and playing around with NanoBanana, playing around with Google's video model versus Flux's models versus whatever the models out there. If you don't have an intuitive sense for how the technology is improving and the jumps that we're making in between different models, you are failing your entire organization, because you don't have the intuitive understanding of how this technology is evolving. So this is not one to just sit out or let the young people, kind of over there figure that out, and like AI is not for you. If you're not in the tools every single day, really going to uncomfortable places to test them out, then you're failing your organization. It starts with top-down mandate and leadership. The second thing is radical bottom-up enablement, right? So this is not the time to have lots of red tape. The amount of corporates, especially in Mittelstand, mid-cap companies that I see that are worried about, oh, but our data is getting leaked and so on and so forth. If you're not finding ways to equip your employees with the best-in-class tools out there, your employees are going to use them anyways. Your data is going to end up in ChatGPT anyways. Humans are incredibly creative and incredibly smart when it comes to making their life easier, saving time, and seeming smarter. So if you really believe that by having some rules and, training your own internal LLM that's just half as good as Gemini or OpenAI, Anthropic, like that's the right way to enable your organization, then I'm sorry to break it to you, someone's going to adopt AI, but it's going to be in a chaotic way and your data is going to get leaked anyway. So the best thing really you can do is adopt the state of the art and enable radical bottom-up adoption. And then the last thing is, be patient, but be forceful. So, oftentimes, like with this MIT study, we see companies running a first hackathon. And we just ran a hackathon recently at Visionaries. And, results were, if I'm really honest with you, like a little bit shit. Like results were not completely transformative. And our organization is now completely AI native. And all of our problems have been automated and like we're saved for eternity. No, because these things take time. So you need to run a second hackathon and a third and a fourth. And by the fourth, you're going to see the real results and the tangible, kind of increases. Again, this is like memory. This is like learning. If you just do it once, you're not going to see the results. You need to see the learnings over time. And so you need to be really forceful, but you also need patience in order to really see the transformative results over time. Yeah, so I'm going to end with this slide. The future is already here. It's just not equally distributed, because I really believe this is a time where we're going to see almost the world pull apart in these two segments, right? We're going to live in 2025 or maybe in 2027 2 years from now, and you're going to be in some places, maybe San Francisco, maybe London, maybe Singapore, and you're almost not going to recognize this world. Maybe we're going to have something like flying cars, whatever it is. Like it's really truly going to feel like sci-fi. And then you're maybe going to be in some German city where, for whatever reason, we were really held back, where we're still using fax machines, where we're still doing things the way that we've always done them. And it's increasingly, I really think, and this is going to be a huge thing that all of us have to grapple with, it's going to feel like we're living in several decades, if not, maybe at some point several millennia at the same time. It's going to be incredibly weird. And so, all we can do is really brace for, kind of that uncertainty and that weirdness. I think there's going to be tons of opportunity. Hopefully these were, some helpful resources. We're going to share the slides with regard to a lot of the detail content. There's some workshop materials. There's the slide decks from the slides that I used today with a lot more depth and a lot more content. There's some videos where you can listen to the slides in narration. You can share those with your team. You can run your first workshops. There's instructions for how to build your first AI agent, all of that in the resources. So I hope this was a little bit of inspiration to start your AI journey, not just individually, but also with your organizations. It's going to be uncertain. It's not going to be comfortable. That much is guaranteed. But I really think it's the only option we have. Either we adopt and we live, and try and shape actively as women and as leaders, kind of the world with AI as we want it, or we don't adopt and we really risk falling behind and being, part of the group that, feels like we're still living in the past century when the rest of the world is really racing ahead. Thank you so much. I think there's a bunch of questions from the audience, so I'm going to hand over to Helena to coordinate how we're going to go through them.
Yes, expert coordinator. Thank you, Judith, so much. I'm literally blown away. I was just pressing reaction after reaction. And as you can see, everyone is agreeing on that. I think I've never seen that many emoticons fly from my screen. I thought it was incredibly interesting. And I loved your energy and the way you explain it. So I think this was incredibly helpful to everyone in this class. We even crashed the Zoom account in the beginning because we were so many people. So I apologize at this point, but don't worry, we have a recording. We will send it to everyone. I have goosebumps. I'm just so happy with this class. Okay, so now back to your questions. Elena, I see that you were very fast. The stage is yours for your question. And maybe Judith, if you stop sharing your screen, we can
Of
see each other
course.
bigger.
There we go.
Let's go.
So first of all, thanks so much for this absolutely excellent, like brilliant masterclass. Like very grateful to be part of this. And I have two questions. So if I had the choice to go and join, let's say, McKinsey as a consultant tomorrow, or I had the choice to go and work at a frontier, like had the opportunity to look me or anyone else at a frontier company, which is the best path forward to help shape the future? That's kind of the question number one. Question number two, again, if someone else had the opportunity to go and build in public and, learn anything possible about AI and like build in public whatever is our best that we can share, be it more kind of systemic thinking or like really hands-on sharing and community building. Again, is that the better path, or is there a better path to go and, let's say, get like a MA or MBA from like a top school? And if MA or MBA from a top school, which one is the one that will give you the edge to stand out
I
and
love
also
you're firing all the questions.
yes,
No, that's
like,
fantastic. So
and to stand out and also to contribute to the future in a
100%.
meaningful way?
Yeah, thank you so much, Eleanor. So on the first one, I'm gonna be very drastic and quick. I mean, if you're still thinking about joining McKinsey or like a frontier tech company, then I haven't done my job in this AI class just now. I think the question is absolutely like you should go join whatever the frontier is. I don't think, I think McKinsey is an amazing place and they have amazing people, but I don't think consulting today is where the frontier of technology is happening. So if you can go to the center of power, I talked earlier about, where that center of power sits. Go and play a role there, go learn from the most amazing people. I think that's going to teach you so much more than you could in, kind of other previous centers of excellence. First question. Second question, should you build in public, like your own startup? If there's even an inkling of entrepreneurial energy in you and you have the stomach for building in public, go do that. I mean, this is the time, if there was ever a glorious time for people who have, ideas of the world, who have things they want to put out, like things that just need to come out of you, AI is your calling. Like, the things that I just showed you with regard to AI agents, you could start that journey like today. Like, it really, you don't have to be a developer anymore. Like, I'm not gonna, say that developers are no longer needed or any of that, but like, if you are non-technical and you want to achieve something in technology, it's never been as easy as today. And so for me, there's no question, if you want to do that, go do that. I can only encourage you. And then the last piece is like, should you go and get like a master's or like, kind of a degree in general? Well, the interesting thing is that we're seeing kind of degrees or higher education come down overall. And that's for many reasons. A, the ballooning in cost, people are just not seeing the value relative to the cost. But I also think that AI is playing a role, because to be very, very honest, if, I have daughters, they're not quite studying in university yet, but if I had a daughter and she was thinking about studying for law in Germany, which is like a 5 to 6 year course, and by the end of it, she's going to be like an entry level, kind of law clerk or like, lawyer somewhere. I just don't know if that's a good idea, to be honest, given where the technology, stands and how quickly it's developing. So I myself have benefited tremendously from lots of education, and I'm not trying to take away from that. I do actually think if you're just curious and if you're doing it because you want to think about the world, you want to read the papers, you want to read the books, you actually truly, it makes you think, it makes you a better human being, go do that. That's amazing. That's something I can wholeheartedly encourage. If you're, however, doing it for specific skills that you think are going to pay into whatever career you think you're going to have, I think that's no longer an obvious choice for me to then go to university and get a degree. I think it's much better, go join a tech company, go build your startup. So maybe that's a couple of ways to answer the question.
Excellent question. Excellent answer. Thank you so
Elena.
much.
All right, we have 4 more minutes, so let's try and get as many people as possible. Please ask one question, and I'm excited to hear Judith's answer. Let's go with Nina.
Hi, thank you so much, Judith, for this really great masterclass. I do follow you on Instagram, so I've been kind of following along for a while now. And when you posted about Nana Banana, I went and tried it, and I was playing around with it. And one of the things that I noticed as a woman of color is my features started becoming very European. And I've seen that kind of replicated, especially in imagery. And I wonder, you've talked about the inequality. Perhaps this is a more philosophical question, but given that you have 1,000 women here, what is it that we can be doing to try and make sure that the future of AI isn't racist, isn't misogynist, isn't creating
100%.
harms?
Yeah, Nina, I mean, it's the right question. I don't have the answer. I think the only thing that we can do is like get into that room, right? Like, how is it, like, how is it that this is just happening? And I showed the picture of like all the people who are involved in the frontier of AI. I don't actually even think that they are trying to do active harm. Far from it. I think actually a lot of AI researchers joined the AI research community because they were really trying to do lots and lots of good and right. And there's lots of researchers in the AI safety community that are very aware of bias and so on and so forth. But these models are trained on the entirety of the internet data. Well, it turns out the internet is freaking racist. Turns out the internet is full of, kind of more women looking, kind of Caucasian than maybe women looking like you and me. And so today LLMs are, they're just a representation of the world, and the world is broken. The world is messy. The world is sometimes really, really ugly. And so I think the best thing we can do is acknowledge, not assume that they're doing active harm. They're not. Again, these are next token predictors, right? They're doing what they were trained to do. But we can change whatever the status quo is by actively being in the room, voicing that question, voicing that point, actually saying, sorry, like, this is not quite doing the job for me. And then, together, helping to, put the types of guardrails and, kind of systems in place that will allow us to get a lot more, kind of equally distributed benefit from this technology than, we're currently seeing.
Thank you.
Great.
We can stay a couple more minutes, Helena. So let's,
all right, let's get Joanna on, and maybe one more, but let's see.
I try to be short, but anyways, I want to thank you. That was really really insightful for me. And I have the feeling that staying up to date about all the AI developments and parallel testing all the new tools is just impossible while you're doing like a real job. And my question to you is, what do you recommend to not let the feeling to be overwhelmed rule and stay like on top of things anyways?
Yeah, Joanna, it's a great point. First, let me tell you, I said this to my dear friend Paula yesterday. I have feelings of being overwhelmed. Like I am so in the AI bot. Like I wake up in the morning and read about AI. I go to bed at night and read about AI. I speak to founders who do like I do nothing but AI, and I still feel I'm overwhelmed and like things are escaping me and like, oh my God, how can I possibly stay on top of what's happening? So it's not just you, it is the market. These are crazy times. We're seeing a mobilization of capital and velocity and acceleration of a technology that we've never ever seen before. It's normal to feel like things are getting a little bit out of control. The thing that I would push back on, that you said in the beginning, is like, you can't do that while still doing your job. Well, I think this is your job. I think this is everyone's job. Like, I think if someone is saying, I can't make time to learn about AI because I've got a job to do, I'm like, well, your job is to learn about AI, because your job should change because AI exists. So whatever role you have, if this is a kind of time scoping issue with your manager, like go have that conversation with your manager and say, hey, listen, this is really, really important. I need to get this right. We need to get this right as an organization. So how do we actually scope out time and like space to do this? If you're a leader, this is exactly the conversation that you should be having with your employees, right? So if employees are saying, oh, I can't do AI because I'm like busy doing these other things, it's like, well, go figure out how to do them better with AI so that it actually saves you some time. So I would really, really drastically reframe as AI as like this thing that happens over there while my work happens over here. Like that's entirely the wrong way to think about it. It's one and the same thing. And in my opinion, and I've said this publicly many times, like the best thing that all of Europe or like, corporations, companies could do right now is like stop what they're doing, except for nurses and doctors because they still need, but like you get what I mean, and like learn about AI. Like I honestly mean it. I don't think it matters to sell 3 more toys or whatever it is your company does. I think it matters to get this thing right. And so just prioritize it accordingly in your kind of day-to-day work.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, integrated. That's what we already do. But I have the feeling in the beginning, everything takes longer if you use new tools and so on. So, but thank you anyways for your advice.
Be patient
Yeah.
and forceful.
Thank
Agree.
you,
Yeah.
Joanna.
Okay.
We've had
One
the
last
same.
question, maybe.
No,
Sorry.
well, also just to add to that, like we've had the same thing at 10 more N, and we had this anxiety, and then we just started building AI agents in the last months, and it's incredible the work it does right now with Leah AI doing sales for us and customer conversations. But it's a matter of priority and just sitting down and starting on it. Okay, one last question. We're already over time, but I think we can do one more, right? You did? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Bao, you go.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. It's so close to my heart. I bring women to the forefront of AI. Since this year, I've reached so many women. And my question is, how can we reach more women to make AI work for them and not just being a thing that, is out there? And I would really love to support you in any way possible. So how can I support you and
Oh, that's
support
so
this
kind.
mission and other women more? Because I've been working really hard this year to bring so many women to the forefront as possible and actually bring the practice and the tools, like how can you click and how you find stuff out to the people. And
100%.
I don't know, it's so close to my heart because this is such a great opportunity and we shouldn't miss it. There's so many possibilities for our career and
100%.
for the time that we are spending for our loved ones and everyone to take part in this revolution. And if we don't take part in it, someone else will take our space in the future. And I
Yeah.
wish so much from my heart that I could support you and other women more. And please
That's super,
let me
super
know
kind,
how I
Bao.
can do it, because I think
Yeah.
that so many women who have like this problem that they've been like told they are not mathematic enough, they are not technical enough, and
Yeah.
then you have it in your bag and you are like, oh, this is so hard. How should I like get started, or how can I do
Yeah,
this thing on my
100%.
own? And
So how to get started, right? So
yeah, I just
look at the
want to.
resources. Yeah, 100%. Look at the resources that I shared. Like I think
Yeah, I
there's a couple
know.
of questions that you asked, right? So it's on the one hand how to get started individually. Hopefully today was like a first insight into what you can do and some really actionable next steps with regard to how you can advance both individually as well as an organization. That's the first thing to do. Just like do it today, do it tomorrow, do it ASAP. The second piece is like, how can you spread the word, right? And I think it's just at the end of the day, connecting, right? It's like connecting, sharing, driving visibility. I give you all the links to like amazing women to follow in AI. There's accounts to follow, there's content, right? So it's just at the end of the day, being in the room, having the visibility, and then sharing that visibility with others. Women tend to be connected to other great women. So, whoever the, girlfriends or people are in your life, just have that conversation with them. I tried to do it with my friendship group, a couple of whom, dialed in to this call today, because some of them were on maternity leave and they were, taking care of their babies, and kind of out of work for a while. And I kind of told them, this thing is happening and I want you to know that it's happening. And I don't want to scare anyone, but I do think it's going to bring tremendous shift. So I would really love for you to take some time and to look into this topic. And so, I think just have the conversations with the women that you know. At the end of the day, life goes through proximity and through trust. And I think if we all together do those, couple of things, and I think we're already well underway to doing what we can. And then next to that, and that's also in the readings, but there's a couple of accounts that are actually openly publishing positions that are non-technical that still allow you to move the needle for AI. There's lots of AI safety research that actually isn't technical research. There's AI ethics work. There is journalistic work, right? We still don't have enough writing, enough narration about what's happening. But I always say that AI, to me, most of the time, just feels like some stupid process chart from some big consultancy, and it's just the most boring thing ever, because I know that 80% of employees looking at that won't get inspired and won't change their day-to-day work. We need a lot more emotional storytelling. We need narration. We need people to put things into context. So these are all jobs, even if you're not technical, where I think lots of women can play an amazing role, but it just requires us to start somewhere. I can link that. I don't have that specific article in the resources, but I'm going to make sure to add it because it listed, a couple of the positions, for example, that, are currently open, for non-technical folks to apply to. So actually many, many different things to be doing and to be championing.
Thank you very
Judith.
much for
Thank you,
sharing,
Val.
and it's very close to my heart. I also do a lot and try to train women with my courses and everything, but I think there's so much to do and we shouldn't miss this chance. And I think all these things
100%.
that you mentioned, that are really great starting points. Please, everyone, go and get your hands down on AI.
This was actually a perfect ending question and answer. I couldn't agree more. I think this was a great start for everyone to get the knowledge, get out there, start talking about it. Thank you all for joining until 20 minutes over. That's incredible. It speaks for itself. You did a fantastic job. Let's see what else we can do. I think this is just the start of a great, interesting journey. And you will all get the recording and the follow-up email. You did final famous last words. Anything you want to share? You see the reactions. I think this was a fantastic success.
No, it was really so great to spend time with all of you. I had a blast. This is my absolute passion. I think about nothing else but AI all day, every day. And so this was just perfect. Thank you so much. And I hope we get to meet, sometime very soon and discuss more of this in depth and detail. Thanks so much, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day and weekend, actually. It's a Friday. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.